the crisp pop of a champagne cork in the exclusive quiet of a first-class cabin. For most, it's a sound of luxury. For Charles Vanguard, a self-made tech billionaire, it became the sound of humiliation. He wasn't just denied a drink. He was denied his dignity in a blatant act of prejudice at 35,000 feet. The airline had no idea who they had just insulted. They saw a black man in a hoodie, not the brilliant CEO who held a massive stake in their company. By the time the plane landed, a decision had been made. A decision that would unleash a financial firestorm, vaporize billions in market value, and serve a plate of karma, so cold, so precise, it would become a modern corporate legend. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's about the moment one man decided respect was worth more than their entire airline. The hum of the Rolls-Royce Trent 900 engines was a familiar lullaby to Charles Vanguard. It was the sound of movement, of progress, the ambient noise of a life lived between continents. Flight 112 from JFK to London. Heathrow, operated by Majestic Air, was a routine commute for him. As the CEO of Vanguard Innovations, a company that had revolutionized supply chain logistics with predictive AI, Charles spent nearly a third of his year in the air. He knew the flight crews on a dozen different airlines by name, knew the best seats for sleeping on a 777 versus an A380, and had his travel routine down to a science. He settled into seat 2A, a plush, semi-enclosed suite in Majestic Air's much-lauded Imperial First Class. He had shed his bespoke Brioni jacket, revealing a simple, comfortable yet high-end grey hoodie, the unofficial uniform of the tech world he dominated. He was 38 years old, with a mind that moved like a quantum computer, and a presence that was usually calm and observant. Today he was tired. A grueling week of negotiations in New York had culminated in a landmark deal, and all he wanted was to decompress on the 7-hour flight back to his London base. The pre-departure rituals began. A flight attendant, a woman in her late 50s with tightly pinned blonde hair and a name tag that read Lorraine, moved through the cabin. She offered warm towels, pajamas, and amenity kits with practiced, if somewhat weary grace. She smiled warmly at the man in 1A, a ruddy-faced executive in a pinstripe suit. She laughed at a joke from the couple in 1F and 1G, who were clearly celebrating an anniversary. When she reached Charles, the smile tightened, becoming a mere facsimile of hospitality. "Can I get you a pre-departure beverage, sir?" she asked, her tone clipped professional, but lacking the warmth she'd shown others. Charles looked up from his tablet, where he was reviewing schematics for a new automated warehouse. "Yes, thank you, Lorraine," he said, having noted her name tag. He always made a point to use people's names. "I'd love a glass of the Pol Roger Winston Churchill." It's been a long week. It was Majestic Air's prestige champagne, a bottle that retailed for over $300. It was also a standard offering for their Imperial First Class passengers. Lorraine paused. A flicker of something annoyance, disbelief crossed her face before being smoothed over. "The Pol Roger, sir," she repeated, as if he had misspoken. "That's the one," Charles confirmed, a polite smile on his face. "I'm not sure if we've begun serving that just yet," she said a little too quickly. "Perhaps I can get you some orange juice or a water." Charles's smile didn't falter, but a small internal alarm bell began to ring. He had flown this exact route dozens of times. He knew the service protocol. "I'm quite sure it's available. The gentleman in 1A seems to be enjoying a glass." He gestured subtly with his head. Indeed, the pinstriped executive was sipping the pale gold liquid from a delicate flute. Lorraine's eyes darted to the man, then back to Charles. Her face hardened almost imperceptibly. "We have a limited supply of that particular vintage, sir. We have to ensure we have enough for the entire flight." The implication hung in the air thick and unpleasant. You might not be the kind of passenger we want to waste the good stuff on. Charles was no stranger to this. The subtle, insidious prejudice that questioned his presence in spaces of luxury and power. The surprise on a concierge's face, the extra scrutiny at a security checkpoint, the assumption he was an assistant and not the principal. He had developed a thick skin, a practiced patience. Usually he would let it go. It wasn't worth the energy. But today he was tired. He had just closed a deal worth 9 figures a deal that would create hundreds of jobs and further cement his company's legacy. He had earned his place in this seat, had earned the right to a simple glass of champagne without an interrogation. Lorraine, he said, his voice dropping slightly, but losing none of its authority. I am a paying first-class passenger. Your manifest will show I am a Majestic Air Diamond Medallion member. I am requesting a standard beverage from your menu. Please go and get the champagne. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The quiet command was more powerful. Several other passengers were now surreptitiously watching the exchange. Lorraine's face flushed a blotchy red. She felt challenged, exposed. Her ingrained biases, nurtured over decades of seeing a certain type of person in these seats, had been called out. Instead of retreating, she doubled down. She turned to the passenger in 2C, a well-dressed white man in his 60s who had been studiously ignoring the interaction. Let's call him Mr. Peterson. So Lorraine said to Mr. Peterson, her voice, now syrupy sweet, a stark contrast to her tone with Charles. Can I get you started with a glass of our finest Paul Roger? To celebrate the start of a wonderful journey, it was a calculated petty act of public humiliation. She was deliberately offering the very thing she had just denied Charles to the man sitting right next to him. Mr. Peterson looked flustered. He glanced from Lorraine's expectant face to Charles's stony expression. He was a man who clearly hated confrontation. Oh, well, I suppose. A water is fine for me, thank you, he stammered, wanting no part in the drama. Lorraine's face fell. Her power play had failed. Defeated and fuming, she shot Charles a venomous look, turned on her heel, and stalked back toward the galley without another word. She did not return with champagne or water or anything else. She had simply erased him. Charles sat there for a moment, the quiet hum of the cabin now sounding like a roar in his ears. The small public shaming was a minor thing in the grand scheme of his life, a paper cut. But it was a paper cut on a wound that never truly healed. It was the principle. Majestic Air, an airline he frequented, an airline he had personally and professionally invested in, had just told him in no uncertain terms that he didn't belong. He looked out the small oval window as the ground crew scurried below. The tug was connecting to the nose gear. They would be pushing back any minute. He picked up his phone. He had a few minutes of signal left. He could have fired off an angry tweet. He could have demanded to see the purser. He could have made a scene. But Charles Vanguard didn't operate on loud, fleeting anger. He operated on quiet, seismic strategy. He sent a text message to his chief financial officer, David Chen. It was short and cryptic. David, liquidate it. All of it. David, sitting in his office in London, nearly dropped his coffee. All of what he texted back, immediately. Charles typed his reply as the captain's voice came over the intercom, welcoming everyone aboard. Our entire position in Majestic Air. MJA on the NYSE. Call our broker at Goldman Sachs. Get it done at market. Open 9:30 a.m. Eastern. And David, cancel the renewal of Project Constellation. Draft the termination clause notice. We'll cite material breach of partnership ethos. David's blood ran cold. He stared at his phone, his mind racing. Their position in Majestic Air wasn't just a few shares. Vanguard Innovations held 4.5 million shares of MJA, a stake of roughly 7%. It was part of a strategic partnership agreement signed 2 years ago. Project Constellation was the codename for Vanguard's multi-million-dollar contract to overhaul Majestic's entire global cargo logistics system. Cancelling it would be a catastrophic blow to the airline. Selling a 7% stake in one go would flood the market and trigger a panic. Charles. What happened? Is everything okay? This will crater their stock. It's a declaration of war. David texted, his fingers trembling slightly. The flight attendant announcement for all cellular devices to be switched to airplane mode began. Charles looked at Lorraine, who was now primly demonstrating how to use a life vest, pointedly avoiding his gaze. He took a slow, deep breath, the stale, recycled air filling his lungs. He felt a cold, hard clarity descend upon him. He typed his final message before the signal died. They forgot who I am. It's time to remind them. He switched his phone to airplane mode, leaned his head back against the supple leather, and closed his eyes. He wouldn't get his glass of champagne. But he was about to serve Majestic Air a consequence that would be felt from their boardroom to the trading floor of the New York Stock Exchange. The flight to London would take 7 hours. The storm would hit New York in 4. The Atlantic Ocean was a vast, dark canvas, below a serene backdrop to the maelstrom Charles had just unleashed. Inside the climate-controlled tube of the A380, the first-class cabin settled into its overnight rhythm. Lights were dimmed to a soft, ambient blue. The clink of cutlery on porcelain was muted. Most passengers were either asleep or engrossed in movies. Charles, however, was wide awake. His mind, usually occupied with algorithms and market projections, was now a finely tuned instrument of war. This wasn't about a missed drink. That was merely the catalyst, the symbolic insult that broke the dam of his professional patience. This was about the insidious, corrosive nature of a company culture that allowed such an incident to happen. If a flight attendant felt so empowered to openly discriminate against a top-tier passenger, what did that say about the rest of the organization, about its HR policies, its training, its leadership? His company, Vanguard Innovations, was built on a foundation of meritocracy and radical inclusivity. They poached the best talent from every corner of the globe, regardless of race, gender, or background. Their brand was synonymous with forward-thinking disruption and integrity. To be in a strategic partnership with a company like Majestic Air, a company that now appeared to harbor a rotten, archaic core, was a liability. It was brand contamination. He opened his laptop, not connecting to the laughably slow in-flight Wi-Fi, but working offline. He pulled up the files for Project Constellation. It was a masterpiece of logistics, a 5-year, $250 million contract to replace Majestic's antiquated cargo tracking system with Vanguard's AI platform. The implementation was set to begin next quarter. It promised to save Majestic Air hundreds of millions in lost freight and inefficiencies. It had been hailed in the business press as a legacy-defining partnership. Charles had personally negotiated the final points with Majestic's CEO, a man named Reynold Beaumont. Charles remembered Beaumont well, a portly man with a patrician air who spoke with the easy condescension of inherited wealth. Beaumont had treated Charles with a veneer of respect, but there was always an undercurrent of surprise, as if he couldn't quite reconcile the sharp, brilliant tech CEO with the black man sitting opposite him. Beaumont had boasted about Majestic's storied history and commitment to tradition. Charles now saw those words for what they were, euphemisms for stagnation and exclusion. Terminating the contract was the real blow. The stock sale was the loud public execution. Cancelling Project Constellation was the dagger to the heart. It wouldn't just hurt Majestic's stock price, It would cripple their future operations and signal to the entire market that the airline was a technological dinosaur incapable of modernizing. He began drafting the official press release that his team would issue after the market chaos began. He wrote with surgical precision, devoid of emotion, framing the decision in pure business terms. Vanguard Innovations has today terminated its partnership with Majestic Air, including the cancellation of the forthcoming Project Constellation. Furthermore, we have divested our entire equity position in the airline. This decision was made following a comprehensive review of our strategic partnerships, which identified a fundamental misalignment of corporate culture and values that represents an unacceptable risk to the Vanguard brand. We believe in partners who embody the principles of innovation, inclusivity, and forward-thinking customer engagement. We concluded that Majestic Air no longer meets these essential criteria. It was perfect. It was devastating. It didn't mention champagne or a flight attendant. It didn't need to. The phrase misalignment of corporate culture and values was a corporate dog whistle that everyone in the industry would understand. It hinted at a deep systemic rot without getting bogged down in the messy details of a single incident. The story of the incident itself, he would hold that back, for now. It was his ace in the hole. Meanwhile, 4,000 miles away in London, David Chen was executing Charles's orders with a grim sense of purpose. It was just after 1:00 a.m. in London, but David was in his home office, a secure line open to New York. On the other end of the line was Mark O'Malley, a managing director at Goldman Sachs and their lead institutional broker. "Mark, are you sitting down?" David had said, his voice tense. "For you, David, always. What's the play?" O'Malley's voice was gravelly accustomed to late-night calls that moved markets. "We're dumping Majestic, all 4.5 million shares of MJA." There was a stunned silence on the line. David could hear the faint sound of a pen dropping on a desk. "You're kidding," O'Malley finally said. "That's a 7% stake. You can't just drop that on the market at open. You'll trigger every high-frequency trading sell-off algorithm on the street. It'll be a bloodbath. Their stock will open in a nosedive." "That's the point," David said flatly. "Jesus, is this coming from the man himself?" "Directly. He's in the air unreachable. The order is firm. We want it sold at market price as quickly as possible, starting at the 9:30 a.m. bell. No dark pools, no quiet offloading to another institution. We want it visible. We want it loud." O'Malley let out a low whistle. "This is personal. What did they do, lose his luggage?" "Something like that," David replied dryly. "There's more. We're simultaneously terminating the Constellation contract. The press release will drop around 9:45 a.m. Eastern." Now O'Malley understood. The 1-2 punch, the stock sale would create the panic. The contract news would justify it and send the stock into a death spiral. Any institutional investor holding MJA would see that its future earnings and modernization plans just went up in smoke. They would rush to sell before the stock hit zero. "Understood," O'Malley said, his voice now all business. "I'll need to prep my team. We'll need to manage the sell-off to maximize speed. It's going to be a messy morning on the trading floor." "Messy is what the client wants," David confirmed. The final piece of the strategy was the narrative. A market move this aggressive needed a story to fuel it. Charles knew that simply dropping a press release wasn't enough. He needed to get the why out there, but subtly. Back on the plane, Charles opened a secure encrypted messaging app. He sent a message to a single contact, Brenda Carnes. Brenda was the most feared and respected investigative financial journalist at the Wall Street Journal. She had a reputation for breaking stories that toppled CEOs and exposed corporate malfeasance. Charles had given her an exclusive on one of his early acquisitions years ago, and they had maintained a relationship of mutual respect. He knew she would understand the nuances of this story. His message was simple. Brenda have a story for you. Majestic Air. Watch MJA at market open. There's a culture problem over there. A big one. My team will send you our official statement at 9:45 ET. But the real story is what happens when a company's culture of the past meets a customer of the future. Give my assistant a call around 10:30. I'll be on the ground and ready to give you an off-the-record background. He didn't need to say more. He had baited the hook with everything a journalist like Brenda craved: a massive market move, a powerful source, and the hint of a juicy David vs. Goliath human interest story behind the corporate jargon. She would be all over it. She would dig. She would find other stories, other disgruntled employees, other dissatisfied customers. She would connect the dots. Satisfied Charles finally closed his laptop. The mechanics were in motion. The trap was set. He looked over at seat 2C. Mr. Peterson was asleep, a blanket pulled up to his chin, blissfully unaware of the corporate drama he had witnessed. He looked for Lorraine, but didn't see her. She was likely working the galley or another cabin, trying to avoid him. He felt a pang not of doubt, but of somber resolution. Thousands of Majestic Air employees, pilots, mechanics, gate agents would be hurt by this. Their pensions, their 401ks, their job security, all tied to the stock he was about to obliterate. He took no joy in that. They were collateral damage in a war declared by their own leadership's arrogance and incompetence. This wasn't just about punishing a flight attendant or a CEO. It was about surgically excising a cancer. Sometimes the only way to save a forest is to start a controlled burn. The plane began its slow, graceful descent towards London. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the eastern sky in hues of orange and pink. For the passengers on Flight 112, it was the start of a new day. For Majestic Air, it was the dawn of their destruction. And Charles Vanguard, the man they had deemed unworthy of a glass of champagne, was about to become the single most expensive passenger in aviation history. The opening bell of the New York Stock Exchange is a declaration of war disguised as a ceremony. At precisely 9:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, that declaration was aimed squarely at one target. On the Goldman Sachs trading floor, Mark O'Malley gave a curt nod to his team. Execute was all he said. The first sell order for Majestic Air MJA hit the system like a depth charge. A block of 500,000 shares dropped at market price. On the NYSE floor, a specialist overseeing MJA stared at his screen in disbelief. Before he could even process the origin of the massive institutional sell-off, a second block hit. Then a third and a fourth. It was a waterfall of digital sell orders, a relentless programmatic deluge. MJA, which had closed the previous day at a stable 42.15, didn't just open lower, it fell out of the sky. The stock was instantly repriced at 39.50, and in the first 90 seconds of trading, it sliced through $38 or then $30. Red lights flashed across trading desks. Alarms designed to signal abnormal volatility began to shriek. High-frequency trading algorithms sniffing blood in the water awoke from their slumber. Programmed to identify downward momentum and heavy volume, they interpreted the sell-off as a catastrophic event and began short-selling MJA shares by the million, betting on its further decline, and in doing so, ensuring it. The floor specialist, a veteran of 2 decades, was shouting into his phone. "What is going on with Majestic? Who's the seller? Is there news?" But there was no news. There was only the raw, inexplicable panic of a mass exodus. The chaos was pure and terrifying. Miles away on the 45th floor of the Majestic Tower, CEO Reynold Beaumont was blissfully unaware. He was presiding over his weekly senior leadership meeting, half listening to a presentation from his head of marketing. The executive was clicking through a series of mock-ups for a new campaign featuring gauzy sepia-toned photos of pilots from the 1960s. "We're leveraging our heritage," the executive explained with a proud smile. "We're reminding our customers that Majestic isn't just an airline, it's a timeless symbol of American prestige." Beaumont nodded approvingly, enjoying the warm bath of nostalgia. His phone, resting on the polished mahogany of the boardroom table, began to vibrate. He shot it an irritated glance. Then it buzzed again and again, a frantic, insistent rhythm that broke the serene atmosphere. Just as he was about to silence it, the boardroom doors flew open. His chief legal officer, George, a man whose baseline disposition was anxious, stumbled in. Today he looked as if he'd seen a ghost. His face was pale and slick with sweat. "Reynold." "My God, you need to see this." George gasped, holding out his tablet. Beaumont snatched the device, his annoyance curdling into confusion. On the screen was a stock chart that looked like an EKG of a dying patient. MJA's ticker was accompanied by a brutal vertical red line pointing straight down. It was trading at $31.20 and was still in freefall. A bright red banner at the bottom of the screen read, "Trading in MJA approaching circuit breaker thresholds due to extreme volatility." What in the hell is this? Beaumont roared his voice, echoing in the suddenly silent room. The marketing executive froze mid-sentence. "Is the whole market down? What's the Dow doing?" "No, it's not the market," George said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's just us. Someone is dumping a biblical number of shares. The street is calling it a targeted attack." Beaumont's mind raced. Who had a position large enough and a reason malicious enough to do this? He was about to demand a call to their largest institutional investors when his executive assistant burst in her eyes, wide with panic. "Mr. Beaumont, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but Brenda Carnes from the Wall Street Journal is on line 1. She says it's critically urgent." The name landed in the room like a grenade. Brenda Carnes didn't write puff pieces about corporate heritage. She wrote corporate obituaries. Beaumont, attempting to project a calm he did not feel, straightened his tie. "Tell her I'm in a board meeting. I'll have communications call her back." "Sir," the assistant said, swallowing hard. "She said to tell you she knows who is selling their stock, and she says she knows why." The blood drained from Beaumont's face. He felt a cold dread snake up his spine. He strode to his desk and snatched the receiver. "Brenda." "Reynold Beaumont," he said, his voice tight. "No time for pleasantries." Reynold came the journalist's voice, sharp and clinical. "My sources at Goldman Sachs confirm Vanguard. Innovations is liquidating its entire position in your company as we speak. That's 4.5 million shares. Would you care to comment on why your landmark technology partner has just declared war on you?" The room seemed to tilt. Vanguard. Charles Vanguard. It was impossible. He and Charles had a deal. They had a partnership. "That's preposterous," Beaumont stammered, his mind reeling. "We have a rock-solid partnership. Charles and I—" "Reynold, it gets worse." Brenda cut in her tone, leaving no room for argument. "My desk just received a press release from Vanguard, scheduled to go wide in 5 minutes. They're terminating Project Constellation, effective immediately. The reason cited is a fundamental misalignment of corporate culture and values. So I'll ask you again, what happened inside your company that would trigger this? And more specifically, what happened on last night's flight 112 from JFK to London? The mention of a specific flight number hit Beaumont like a physical blow. He was completely lost. How could a single flight cause this level of corporate carnage? "And my other sources on that flight," Brenda continued, her voice dropping as she delivered the killing blow, are telling me a rather interesting story about an incident involving Mr. Vanguard himself. Something about the Imperial first-class cabin, and a glass of champagne. There it was, the absurd, trivial detail that was the key to the entire catastrophe. A glass of champagne. Beaumont's mind couldn't compute it. The sheer, insane disproportionality of it all. He was drowning, and someone had just told him the flood started with a leaky faucet. I have no information on that. He lied, his voice cracking. This is baseless slander. It's market manipulation. Majestic Air is a beacon of customer service. Our culture is... He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. He slammed the phone down his hand, trembling. The marketing presentation, still glowing on the large screen with its smiling, sepia-toned faces, was a grotesque mockery of the reality now crashing down around them. At precisely 9:46 a.m., the Vanguard Innovations press release hit the global newswires. The effect was gasoline on a bonfire. The stock, which had been hemorrhaging value, now entered a state of total collapse. The news that the $250 million Project Constellation, Majestic's only credible plan for future modernization, was dead was the final confirmation the market needed. This wasn't a temporary panic. It was a fundamental verdict on the company's viability. MJA plummeted past $25, then $20. At 9:51 a.m., less than an hour after the opening bell, the NYSE circuit breakers automatically halted all trading in the stock to prevent a complete wipeout. It had lost over 40% of its value. In a quiet, tidy house in Queens, Lorraine Peters was unrolling her yoga mat, the radio playing softly in the background. She was looking forward to her class, a small moment of peace in her day. A news bulletin broke through the music. The stunning collapse of Majestic Air stock ticker MJA. The stock has been halted after a precipitous 40% drop this morning. The sell-off appears to have been initiated by tech giant Vanguard Innovations, which simultaneously dumped its massive stake in the airline and cancelled a major technology contract, citing a misalignment of corporate values. Lorraine paused, one hand on her hip. Vanguard Innovations. The name pricked at her memory. She pictured the man from last night, the man in the hoodie in 2A, his quiet intensity, the unnerving stillness in his eyes after she had walked away. A cold, sick feeling began to pool in her stomach. It couldn't be. Her phone rang, a shrill, unfamiliar number. She answered hesitantly. "Hello, is this Lorraine Peters?" The voice on the other end was cold, official, and devoid of any warmth. "Yes. This is Sandra from Corporate Human Resources in Dallas. We need you to come into the JFK administrative office for a meeting at 2 p.m. today. And Lorraine, you are not to report for your scheduled flight this evening. You have been placed on immediate indefinite suspension, pending a full investigation into the events on last night's flight Wonder 12. The line went dead. Lorraine's hand went limp, the phone clattering to the floor. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together in her mind with brutal, horrifying clarity. The man in the hoodie, the name on the news, the stock crash, the suspension. It was all him. All of this corporate destruction, this financial apocalypse, because she hadn't given him a glass of champagne. The sheer scale of his retribution was incomprehensible, like swatting a fly with a wrecking ball. She sank onto her sofa, her heart hammering against her ribs, as she was crushed by the weight of a consequence she could never have imagined. By 10:30 a.m., Brenda Carnes's story had been published on the front page of the Wall Street Journal's website. The headline was devastating. Vanguard CEO crashes Majestic Air stock after first-class humiliation. Fueled by Charles's off-the-record confirmation and corroborated by other passengers from the flight who were now flooding journalists' inboxes, The story laid out the incident in damning detail. The hashtag #LostMajesticFail was the #1 trend on Twitter worldwide. By 11:00 a.m., less than 90 minutes after the opening bell, over $1.2 billion of Majestic Air's market capitalization had been vaporized. As the sun rose over London, Flight 112 began its final descent. Charles Vanguard felt the gentle bump of the landing gear deploying. He had watched the catastrophe unfold from 35,000 feet, a detached observer of his own creation. He moved through Heathrow's Terminal 5 with his usual quiet efficiency and settled into the back of his waiting Bentley. He looked at the stock chart on his phone. The line was flat now, the trading still halted. It was a portrait of destruction. His phone rang. It was David Chen. "The board is in absolute meltdown," David said, his voice a cocktail of awe and terror. "They're screaming at each other on a conference call. Beaumont is finished. They're already talking about emergency financing, just to make payroll next month. They're facing total ruin. The infection is being purged," Charles said, his voice even. "What's our next move?" Charles David asked, the question hanging in the air. "What happens now?" Charles looked out the window at the passing London traffic. The demolition was complete. The site was cleared. Now came the time for the architects to move in. "Now, David," Charles said, a new calculating tone entering his voice. "Now we wait. We let them bleed out. And then we buy the bones." The weeks that followed the 90-minute collapse were a period of brutal public reckoning. Majestic Air wasn't just a failing company. It had become a cultural artifact, a symbol of an old guard's hubris being shattered by a new world's standards. The story was a relentless fixture in the news cycle, a modern fable discussed with a mixture of schadenfreude and awe. The consequences rained down with devastating precision. Reynold Beaumont was the first to be consumed by the inferno he had failed to contain. The board of directors, facing an unprecedented shareholder revolt and the looming threat of class actions lawsuits, demanded his resignation. It was a cold, sterile affair in the very boardroom where he had once held court. There were no handshakes, no expressions of gratitude for his years of service. There was only the stony silence of men and women trying to distance themselves from a contagion. Stripped of his title and his future stock options, now rendered worthless, Beaumont's personal fortune, intrinsically tied to the airline's health, was decimated. The press was merciless. A particularly cruel tabloid photo captured him slumped in a coach seat on a budget airline, the ultimate indignity for a man who once personified first-class privilege. He became a ghost in the corporate world, a cautionary tale whispered in exclusive clubs where he was no longer welcome. For Lorraine Peters, the karma was of a more personal, soul-crushing variety. Fired for gross misconduct, she found herself at the center of a vitriolic online storm. She was no longer a person, but a meme, the champagne Karen, the face of petty prejudice. Seeking to reclaim her narrative and perhaps salvage some shred of her former life, she agreed to a daytime television interview. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. Sitting under the hot studio lights, facing a host with a practiced, sympathetic gaze, Lorraine's attempt at an apology unraveled. "I worked that cabin for 30 years, she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and self-pity. "You see so many people. I just didn't think he was, one of those first-class people." The words meant to explain her mindset instead exposed its rotten core. The clip went viral, cementing her infamy. The offers to sell her story dried up, replaced by a deafening silence. No airline would touch her. Her career was not just over, it was buried under an avalanche of public scorn. And Majestic Air, the grand institution itself, was dying. Its vibrant hubs became corporate graveyards. At JFK and Heathrow, entire terminals felt haunted. Gates that once bustled with activity sat empty, the jet bridges retracted like arms folded in defeat. Grounded aircraft, once symbols of global connection, collected dust on distant tarmacs, their proud liveries fading under the unforgiving sun. The stock was delisted from the NYSE, a final humiliating blow. The announced layoffs of over 8,000 employees sent a shockwave of grief through the company, affecting everyone from senior pilots with decades of experience to newly hired gate agents who had seen their dream job evaporate. The airline was hemorrhaging cash, its brand toxic, its future a black hole. During this entire period, Charles Vanguard was a phantom. He remained in his London headquarters, immersed in the work of Vanguard Innovations. He refused every interview request, issued no further statements, and allowed the narrative to be shaped by the media and the market's brutal logic. To the world, he was the architect of the destruction who had simply walked away from the rubble. But behind the closed doors of his office, he was a predator watching its prey. He and his CFO, David Chen, monitored every development, every press release, every legal filing. They had a team of analysts mapping the airline's complex web of assets and liabilities, creating a detailed blueprint of the dying behemoth. 2 months after the incident on Flight 112, David walked into Charles's office, a grim look on his face. He placed a folder on the vast oak desk. "They're filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection on Monday," David said, his voice low. "It's official. The creditors are taking over. They'll be forced to liquidate." Charles didn't look at the folder. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on the London skyline, a tapestry of old stone and modern glass. What are the assets worth, David, clear of the debt if they sell it off for parts? "The analysis is in there," David gestured to the folder. "The landing slots at Heathrow, JFK, and LAX are the crown jewels worth maybe 600 million on their own. The fleet is mostly leased, but the equity in the owned aircraft and the maintenance facilities might fetch another 400 or 500 million. All told, broken up and sold for scrap, maybe $1 billion too if they're lucky." A long silence filled the room, punctuated only by the distant city hum. "I don't want the parts," Charles said, finally, his voice quiet but resonant. "I want the whole thing." David stared at him, his professional composure momentarily fracturing. "Charles, you can't be serious. You want to buy Majestic Air. The name is poison. The brand is a synonym for failure and bigotry. Employee morale is non-existent. Why in God's name would you want to chain yourself to that anchor?" Charles turned his chair to face his friend and CFO. His eyes held an unnerving calm, the same focused intensity he'd had on the plane. "You're thinking like an accountant, David. Look at it like an architect. The brand is worthless, I agree. We'll scrap it. But the infrastructure, the gates, the routes, the landing slots that are nearly impossible to acquire, that's the foundation. And what about the people? There are thousands of skilled pilots, mechanics, engineers, and flight attendants who were failed by their leadership. That is valuable human capital being left to rot." He stood up and walked to the window. "We didn't destroy Majestic Air," he continued, his voice taking on a new visionary tone. "We surgically removed a tumor of arrogance and complacency that was killing it from the inside. Now we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, not just to own an airline, but to build a new one from the ground up on our terms, to prove that a company founded on dignity, respect, and technological supremacy isn't just a moral victory, but a profitable one. This isn't about salvaging the past, it's about owning the future." This was the Phoenix Gambit. It was audacious, bordering on insane, but it was pure Charles. He assembled a consortium of investors with breathtaking speed. He leveraged his reputation, calling on venture capital firms who had made fortunes, betting on his vision, and pitching the idea to socially conscious investment funds. He sold them not on the idea of an airline, but on the idea of a revolution. An airline built like a tech company, with Vanguard's AI at its core, and a culture of radical inclusivity as its soul. With billions in backing, Charles's new holding company descended on the bankruptcy proceedings not as a vulture, but as a savior. The offer they presented stunned the creditors and the court. It would pay off the secured debt in full, establish a multi-million-dollar severance fund for the laid-off workers, and guarantee employment for the remaining staff under new contracts. It was a lifeline no one had dared to imagine. The deal was swiftly approved. 6 months after being denied a simple courtesy, Charles Vanguard was the owner of the airline that had slighted him. The name Majestic Air was immediately retired, its logo erased from every plane terminal and uniform. The new company was christened with a name that reflected its new purpose, Momentum Airlines. The first act of Momentum Airlines was an all-hands meeting held in a cavernous maintenance hangar at JFK. Thousands of remaining employees gathered, their faces etched with a mixture of fear, resentment, and a sliver of desperate hope. They stood amidst half-disassembled engines and towering aviation equipment, the air thick with the smell of jet fuel and anxiety. They were expecting a slick corporate raider in a $1,000 suit to deliver a speech full of empty platitudes before gutting the rest of the company. Instead, Charles Vanguard walked onto the makeshift stage alone, wearing his simple grey hoodie. He walked slowly, pausing for a moment to look up at the tail of a grounded 1977, its old, tarnished logo, a ghost of the past. He stepped up to the podium and looked out at the sea of anxious faces. "Good morning," he began, his voice calm and clear, carrying through the vast space without a tremor. "My name is Charles Vanguard, and as of today, I'm not just your new owner. I'm your new partner." A skeptical murmur rippled through the crowd. "I know what many of you are probably thinking." He continued, leaning forward slightly, his gaze sweeping across the hangar. "You're thinking, there's the man who destroyed our company. And on some level, you wouldn't be wrong. I was the catalyst for the events that brought us here. But I want to be crystal clear about what was destroyed. It wasn't your jobs, your skills, or your dedication. It was a failed leadership. It was a toxic culture that valued an imaginary past over a necessary future. It was a system that forgot its most important asset, its people, both the people it served in the cabin and the people who served it on the ground and in the air. He let that sink in before continuing. The old company failed you. Today that company is dead, and in its place, we are going to build something that lasts, together. He then laid out his vision, not in corporate jargon, but in clear, powerful commitments. He announced the Momentum Pledge, a complete overhaul of corporate culture. Every single employee would undergo new comprehensive training focused on service, de-escalation, and diversity, designed by the best experts in the field. He announced transparent, equitable pay scales and a revolutionary profit-sharing program. From now on, he declared, when this airline succeeds, every single one of you succeeds with it. He promised to invest billions in technology, integrating Vanguard's AI to create the most efficient and passenger-friendly airline in the world. And then he delivered his masterstroke. This new vision needs a leader who understands our new direction from day one, he said. So I want to introduce you to your new interim CEO. He gestured to the side of the stage, and Catherine Shaw walked out. A wave of shock and recognition went through the veteran employees. They knew her. She was the one board member who had fought for change, who had been pushed out by Beaumont's old guard. Her presence was a powerful symbol that this was not just a rebranding. It was a genuine regime change. As Charles finished his speech, the initial stony silence of the crowd had thawed. The skepticism in their eyes was replaced by a fragile, flickering hope. A lone mechanic near the front began to clap slowly then, with more conviction. The applause spread hesitant at first, then growing into a thunderous ovation that echoed off the high steel ceiling. It wasn't just applause for a speech, it was a collective exhale, the release of months of fear and uncertainty. A year later, the comeback of Momentum Airlines was the most celebrated story in business. It had become the gold standard for both service and culture. Charles Vanguard was on a flight from London to New York, sitting in seat 2A. The cabin was familiar, but the atmosphere was entirely different. The crew moved with a quiet confidence, a genuine warmth that couldn't be faked. He watched as they treated every passenger with the same level of attentive respect. This was his vision manifest. A young flight attendant with a bright, authentic smile approached him. "Mr. Vanguard, welcome aboard," she said. "It's an honor to have you with us. Can I get you a pre-departure beverage to start your flight? We have a wonderful Pole Roger Winston Churchill on board today." Charles looked at her then around the cabin. He saw his creation born from a moment of profound disrespect, now a living, breathing testament to radical respect. He thought of the entire journey, the sting of humiliation, the cold calculus of revenge, and the deep, abiding satisfaction of building something better from the ashes. He smiled a genuine, relaxed smile. "I would love a glass," he said. "Thank you." The cork popped with a crisp, satisfying sound. It was the sound of victory. Not the hollow echo of revenge, but the resonant chime of redemption. And so concludes the story of how the denial of a single glass of champagne triggered a multi-billion-dollar corporate detonation. The tale of Charles Vanguard and Majestic Air has become more than just a case study in finance. It's a modern parable about power prejudice and the ferocious velocity of consequence in our hyper-connected world. It's a brutal, brilliant lesson that in the 21st century, a company's most valuable asset isn't its fleet of planes or its storied legacy, but its reputation. Dignity isn't a soft skill to be discussed in an HR seminar. It's a hard asset on the balance sheet, and its neglect can lead to catastrophic financial ruin. Think about the sheer surgical precision of Charles's actions. This wasn't a temper tantrum. It wasn't an angry tweet fired off in a moment of pique. It was a strategic, systemic dismantling. He understood that the insult from the flight attendant wasn't an isolated incident from a rogue employee. He correctly diagnosed it as a symptom of a deeper corporate disease, a culture of arrogance and complacency led by a CEO completely disconnected from the modern world. His response, therefore, wasn't aimed at the symptom, but at the disease itself. He didn't just punish an airline. He executed a hostile takeover of its entire belief system. What makes this story resonate so deeply is that it represents a profound shift in power. The old world of inherited prestige, represented by Reynold Beaumont in his mahogany-paneled boardroom, crashed head-on into the new world of meritocratic disruptive power embodied by Charles Vanguard in his simple grey hoodie. One stood for tradition, the other for transformation. In the end, the market and the court of public opinion delivered a swift and unambiguous verdict on which one was built to last. So now the final question is for you to consider. Where do we draw the line between epic justice and devastating vengeance? If Charles had only destroyed Majestic Air, leaving thousands unemployed and a company in ruins before walking away, Would he be a hero or simply a powerful man who used a sledgehammer to kill a fly? Does his final audacious act of rebuilding the company from its own ashes? The Phoenix Gambit redeem the destructive path he took to get there? Does it elevate him from a vengeful actor to a visionary leader? I want to hear what you think. Let me know your take on this incredible story in the comments below. Join the conversation and let's discuss the complex ethics at play. And if this story resonated with you, if you believe that integrity has value and that karma can sometimes be delivered via a stock ticker, then please take a moment to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who appreciates a story where the bill always eventually comes due. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because we have so many more unforgettable stories of justice, ambition, and consequence coming your way. Thank you for watching.